We're going to move on to the last and final segment of our program today. And we're going to really kind of dive, at least for a few minutes here, into our aquaculture program that is being currently run and headed up by the man you see in the screen next to me, Mr. Ronnie Tan. And for most of you, Ronnie does not need any introduction. However, I'm going to kind of do my best to read off who he is and some of his accolades. So for those of you who do not know Mr. Ronnie Tan, Ronnie is our aquaculture consultant, joined us, the team here in December of 2019. But he also serves on the board of Callista USA and mentors at Hatch Blue, a startup accelerator. An aquaculturalist by training, he has over 35 years of experience in international marketing, supply chain, and general management in multinational chemical and feed companies such as Ronnie, Polink, and Imperial Chemical Industries. In addition to aquaculture feed, he has a working knowledge of oleochemical and zero-calorie natural sweetener industries. He was a board of the Malaysian Palm Oil Board, a board member of the Malaysian Palm Oil Board, and ICI's representative to the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil. So that's just a little bit about Ronnie. There's many more layers. During this, we're gonna have just a kind of a brief conversation, one-on-one, Ronnie, you and I, and for the audience, during our conversation, I'm gonna ask Ronnie some questions, and then in between, we have a couple poll questions that pertain specifically to aquaculture. So if you guys could participate in those polls in between, I'll bring them up to the front. We won't spend too much time, but they'll be available for you to click during the presentation. So with that, Ronnie, how are you?
Thank you. Good to see you.
Very good to see you. So Ronnie, we'll jump right into it and ask a question about sustainability and climate change. How will sustainability and climate change around the globe impact the aquaculture feed industry?
Hello, everyone. It's an absolute honor to be here. Now, before I answer the question, I'll have to probably preface it with a statement. Unlike poultry and pigs, aquaculture comprises a multitude of species. So within Asia itself, I'll have to break it down into perhaps three groups: shrimp, marine fish, and then freshwater fish. So the question here is that what kind of impact is there on the feeds for these species? Let me start with shrimp first. In 1984, I started my career as a nutritionist for a feed company, a major feed company in Asia itself. In those days, the shrimp feed formulation contained 35% fish meal. And it is this fish meal replacement which is the biggest impact on aquaculture feeds or shrimp feeds today. At that time, I remember buying fish meal at $600 a ton. Now, in the recent years, it has gone up as high as $2,000 per ton. So in the past, fish meal replacement was actually driven by cost, but today it's actually sustainability, because the industry does not want fish to be fed to fish. It's much better for fish to be fed to human beings, to mankind. So today we have shrimp feed containing approximately 12% of fish meal. Now, question here, with sustainability being the key driver, can we go lower than 12%? The short answer is yes, but. Now, let me explain that. We can remove fish meal totally from a shrimp diet, but the performance goes down. What happens is that we have to add on a lot of other additives to it in order to bring the performance up to the same level. But that increases the cost. So basically, if you look at, we can't do 100% replacement at the same cost. If we try to do the same cost, the performance falls. So that's where we are today. But there are a lot of novel ingredients that is coming onto the scene for nutritionists. Examples are single-cell proteins as well as insect meals. So these are the new components that is helping us drive sustainability within the shrimp feed sector. Now, the other surprising thing is that although all the feeds share the same group of impacts, the top and major impact for all the three feeds are different. So I mentioned shrimp already. For marine fish feed, it is a different impact. It is actually the use of trash fish. If you look at the coastline from China, moving down to Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, you find that there's a lot of marine fish being farmed. But when you look at the compound feed use, it's actually very little. Now, why the mismatch? It's purely because trash fish is being used instead of compound feed. The plus side of this for the farmer from his side is because it's cheap. Now, I would say it's apparently cheap because trash fish contains at least 85% water. Okay. There are no government regulations, meaning that today they're free to use that, because the problem here is it pollutes the water, and with the pollution, it creates a problem with disease. So it is basically a hotbed of diseases. What's happening today is that, and this is really led by China itself, China is pushing very hard to remove or not allow trash fish to be used in marine fish culture. And this provides an opportunity for feed companies to come in and produce good quality feeds for the fish. Let me move on to freshwater fish feed. Again, a very different impact. The impact on this is actually looking at uneaten feed, the feces from the fish itself. A lot of freshwater cage culture is done in lakes and perhaps water bodies that is used for other things as well, like for example potable water. Before my retirement, I actually worked with the largest tilapia company in the world, and this company had very large operations in North Sumatra. The lake was Lake Toba, and there was this huge debate, a very, very robust debate with NGOs on whether fish culture in this lake would destroy the lake itself. So we had to look at it from a different point of view. Certainly, the effect would come from uneaten feed and feces. Now, this is where I have to make a pitch for DDGS. Phosphorus is one of the major factors that fertilizes the water and creates eutrophication. The inherent phosphorus in freshwater fish feeds tend to be unavailable. All right. So it passes through the digestive system of the fish and it goes out into the feces, basically unused. And this is a fertilizer which destroys the water quality of the lake itself. DDGS has very high levels of available phosphorus. So using DDGS together with phytase would help the absorption of phosphorus into the body of the fish itself. Now, so I've mentioned these three sort of species or three groups. In the past 5 years, the uniting factor that has been pushing sustainability is probably the United Nations SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And this basically has spawned quite a few sort of initiatives. If you look at investment, in the past you have private equity investing in aquaculture feed projects, but they only look at return on investment. With SDGs, it has spawned a lot of impact investment. And in impact investment, 50% of the KPI is based on return on investment, but the other 50% is based on impact, the impact that it helps the SDGs itself. Another two anecdotes. DSM is a Dutch company that is a major feed additive producer, and they have made sustainability part of their DNA. And they have started last year an initiative to have sustainability done all the way down the value chain, because DSM provides feed additives, so they're very much on the high end, the upstream end of the value chain itself. The other company is BASF. BASF has entered aquaculture, and what they're trying to do is provide cleaner energy by providing solar cells together with battery packs, and this provides clean energy 24/7. And the goal here is to prevent greenhouse gases, or the emission of greenhouse gases. Let me just end very quickly by giving you three examples of feed companies that have made initiatives. Ale Aqua is a Danish feed company, and in 2020, they said that they would not use any soybeans from Brazil because of deforestation in the Amazon. Biomar is another Danish company which is listed on the Copenhagen Stock Exchange. And although they have to produce an annual report every year, they call it a sustainability report. And if you read their sustainability report, 50% of it shows initiatives on being able to produce more sustainable feed. The last company, as an example, is Skretting. Skretting is a Dutch feed company, and they have just been certified, ISO certified, for carbon neutral feeds. I just hope I've gone around a rather long way, but I just wanted to give you different perspectives on how sustainability impacts the aquaculture feed industry. Back to you, Caleb.
Hey, thanks, Ronnie. Really great perspective there. Always thorough. Always. So for the audience here, we see the first poll question, and it's: do you currently use corn co-products in your aqua feeds? I see people already chiming in. I appreciate that. We're gonna let those polls roll, not to distract from the conversation here. But definitely fill those out. Like our last poll, they're all going to be confidential, but it helps us, gather our baseline. We had a program set to have Ronnie and myself go out and visit all of you in 2020. Obviously, that did not happen. We got down to Indonesia, didn't we, Ronnie? But we still have many folks to see. So this poll will help us get some of that data virtually. So, Ronnie, I'm going to go to the next question here for you. And the next question I have for you is in regards to COVID-19. And the question is, how has COVID-19 affected the aquaculture supply chain in 2020? And are these changes the new normal?
Right. COVID-19 has affected the aquaculture supply chain in both a demand shock as well as a supply shock simultaneously. Again, I have to differentiate the shrimp, the marine fish, as well as the freshwater fish. Let me start with shrimp first. Demand-wise, the US and China are the largest markets. US imports over 700,000 tons of shrimp a year. China in 2019 registered 650,000 tons. Let's look at the US first. Prior to COVID-19, food service took 70% of all the shrimp that were imported. Retail did 30%. But that all changed. In March 2020, when there was a lockdown, the food service suffered by 50%, and certainly so because restaurants were closed and food service just couldn't work. But retail went up. It went up by about 25% because people had to cook at home, right? How did the year end in 2020? Rabobank said that the US actually improved by 8% compared to 2019. And it was very interesting as well because Bloomberg reported just last week that if you look at the refrigerator, or rather what families buy to cook at home, frozen seafood as well as fresh seafood have gone up by 26% and 25% respectively. Okay. Now, what about China? China, on the other hand, has actually lost volume. It went down in 2020. It went down by 16%. So that was quite a big hit for China itself. Now, let's have a look at the supply side. I'm going to talk about two countries, India and Ecuador. India produces 800,000 tons of shrimp per year. Ecuador produces 600,000 tons. How did COVID-19 affect the supply from these two countries? It shared similar problems, and the similar problems came from the processing plants. In Ecuador, Guayaquil is the center of shrimp processing, but if you remember, Guayaquil was also the hotspot for COVID-19. And the workers could not go back to work in the processing plant because there was no way of, it wasn't social distancing, it was work distancing. And it was impossible to work in the processing factory. India faced the same problem with labor because all the workforce had to return to their home states, and that took a very long time. And trying to get them back again took a very long time. But that's where the similarity ends. The big difference between the two countries come from the products that they make. Ecuador mainly produces head-on, shell-on, the whole shrimp frozen. India produces head-on, shell-on, but it only comprises about 30% of all their exports. The rest of their products are headless shell-on, which goes to Japan, peel deveined, it's breaded, and if you look at the evolution of processing, I would use Thailand as the most evolved, so to speak. And Thailand produces even shrimp dumplings. You can have individual shrimp wrapped up in dumplings, and it can be cooked in 3 minutes. So I think this is what people want at home. Ready to cook, ready to heat, and ready to eat. So what happened then? The consequence was that Ecuador, the processing plants couldn't buy any more from the farms. So ex-farm prices fell. It fell to the lowest worldwide. It went to $2.90 per kilogram, while India was at least $3.90, and Thailand was still at $5. So you can see that kind of effect it has on the whole supply chain. Right, let me stop there for shrimp. Go on to marine fish. In Asia, a lot of marine fish is sold live and it goes to restaurants. Caleb, Tim as well, and I'm sure Manuel, we've all been to Chinese restaurants and we see these aquariums with live fish swimming. And with restaurants closed down, the supply chain suffered terribly. In marine fish, there's very little processing, and this is probably the weakness involved. Moving ahead, I think that the marine fish industry has to look at processing, being able to freeze it, store it, and look at long-term storage. Otherwise, it will suffer the same problem. Let me move on to freshwater right now. The major freshwater species in Asia would be Pangasius, mainly in Vietnam. And a lot of this goes into processing for export. So they did not suffer as much because they were able to hold on to the frozen product. They could just store it and wait for the market to open up again. In terms of tilapia, the major integrators, again, they have their own processing plants. It's meant for export, and they didn't suffer that much either. So if you look at all three species, they had different problems in terms of the supply chain. There is one more point that I want to say, which is very important, and that is food security. Singapore realized that food security was an important issue for the country back in 2015. And they implemented a project or a strategy called 30 by 30, which means that Singapore had to be 30% self-sufficient by the year 2030. When COVID-19 came and Singapore had to lock down in March, there was no imported food coming into Singapore. Now, please remember, Singapore imports nearly 95% of its food needs. So when the border with Malaysia shut, it lost its supply of a lot of things, ranging from fish to meat to poultry to vegetables, everything else. Okay, so this is something that Singapore has addressed from an early stage, but it's very aware that if another black swan incident occurs like COVID-19, it would be the country that suffers the very most. So it is looking at ways of producing its own seafood, whether it is in cage culture in nearby waters or even in recirculating systems, what we call RAS, or recirculating aquaculture systems, on rooftops of their housing buildings, of very tall buildings as well. So again, a very roundabout way, but I hope that I was able to answer your question. Back to you, Caleb.
No, thank you so much, Ronnie. Yeah, it's been a difficult time for aquaculture, as you mentioned, disproportionately so relative to some of our other protein products and customers that we support. Ronnie, I'm going to move on. Get right into it to the third question, and this is it's more of a personal question, actually. It's and for the future of aquaculture. As a mentor, what new technologies do you see being introduced to aquaculture? And will this entice younger generations to join the workforce?
That is probably one of the most interesting questions I've ever been asked, especially the second one, because I've never been asked that question before. Trying to get the younger generation to join the workforce. Before I answer that question, let me just highlight how important this question is by sharing with you two anecdotes. Again, before my retirement, I worked with the largest integrated shrimp farm in Malaysia. The company employed about 600 people. We had students come in to do internships with us, university students, and they would work 3 months, go back, and then tick off their CV, or rather their university requirements. We would pick the best ones, and we would invite them to come and join the company. And everyone would turn us down. We couldn't find a single one. So we asked them why, what's the problem? And they said very simply, it's very hard work. We have to stay out in the sun for, 3-4 hours, and it's a lot of sweat. So I asked them what was their dream job, what would they like to be, considering that they have aquaculture as their qualification. And one of them replied to me by saying that he wanted to be in an air-conditioned room, and he wanted to be a credit officer with a bank. All right, so just hold that thought. Let me share with you the second story that I have. Indonesia has the largest number of young farmers, shrimp farmers. They're called second-generation farmers, and they have their own club called the Petambak Muda, or the Young Farmers Club. And in 2019, I had the opportunity to gather about 12 of them around the table for a quick discussion. And I asked them point blank, did you choose to enter this business? And they said, not at all. Their parents forced them into it because they already had the business. And then I asked them, would you get your children, meaning the third generation, to join this business? And they said no. I said, why? They said it was not the sexiest job in the world. Then I asked them the same question. What would be your dream situation? And they said, I still want to run my shrimp farm, but I want to be on a yacht off Bali. I want to have a computer screen. I want a dashboard which can tell me exactly what's happening in my farm. And with that, I will remain in aquaculture, and I will even get my children to join the business. So just remember those two dreams. And this is where the new technologies come in. So in Hatch, I have probably had one-on-one discussions with about 20 startups. And I'll just gather them into boxes. And these boxes are automation, artificial intelligence, and real-time monitoring. So if you have a recirculating aquaculture system, you have to have all three components. Now, let me give you some examples of the new technologies that we are seeing in aquaculture. The first one is in counters. Now, what do I mean by counters? When we stock shrimp into a pond, we stock post-larvae of about 12 days, and they're about 1 centimeter in length. Our stocking densities are approximately 100 pieces per square meter. So in a 1 hectare pond, you have to stock 1 million. Can you imagine trying to count 1 million post-larvae? Today, it's done manually. People actually look at it, and there are experts to be able to say, okay, you've got 20,000 in this plastic bag, and that's fine. But the level of accuracy differs so much. You could get a good person with about 10 plus minus 10%, and you've got people who have really very bad estimations. So there is this counter which uses imaging to be able to count the numbers of post-larvae. And it just uses imaging. And with the increase in the number of times you do it, the accuracy improves tremendously. And today, they can even get up to 1 plus and minus 1%. Now, isn't that fantastic? Second example, feeders. When we feed, whether it's fish or shrimp, we use automatic feeders these days, so it's just throw out the pelleted feed or the extruded feed. But do we actually know whether the fish or shrimp are eating? There is this new technology that uses sound. It is to capture the sound waves of the species eating itself. All right. And again, it's algorithm based. With increased use, with the more times that you have in terms of data mining information, the accuracy increases. So then you power your auto feeder by the amount the species, or whether shrimp or fish, eat. So if they eat more, it throws out more feed. If they eat less, it reduces the amount of feed itself. Right, let me move on to something else. The next technology is satellite remote sensing. It's very difficult to determine how much shrimp is produced in the world today. China is a very good example. We don't have accurate numbers for China. It ranges anywhere between an FAO figure of 1.5 million tons to an industry figure of 500,000 tons. Okay, so how do we get accurate figures? We use satellite remote sensing. And this is just like what the USDA does. It estimates a corn crop, and you can easily tell what kind of production you get. And with that, you can determine demand, supply, and price. Now, this is what aquaculture needs. This is what prawn farming needs. This is what fish farming requires as well. So this is where this new technology comes in. Another one is real-time diagnostics, and real-time monitoring. And this helps the shrimp farmer in Indonesia who wants to be on a yacht, who just wants to look at his dashboard with his computer screen and tell that the farm is doing well, no emergencies, I don't need to panic. The diagnostics is for the disease side, so it's very similar to our test today for COVID-19. It uses PCR, and we're hoping to get to a stage whereby you can get real-time PCR tests to be able to return the diagnostics to you within half an hour, and it can be done. Another one is underwater cameras. So when you look at fish, for example, in salmon, you can actually tell which fish is sick, and you can divert that fish when you do your sort of straining, or rather, when you divide, your fish up. You can actually divert sick fish into a very different cage so that you can administer antibiotics or medication. You don't want to give your whole population of fish antibiotics because they don't need it in the first place. So you only pick the ones that are sick. And underwater cameras can actually do this. And the last one I want to mention, I mentioned this already, is novel feed ingredients. When you look at fish meal replacements, and this is with single cell proteins and insect meal, which are becoming very large factories these days. There's a new single cell protein factory coming up in China. It has construction has started and should be ready in about 18 months' time. Insect meal, there's a very large factory in the northern part of France, and they are about to launch these products out to the feed industry itself. So let me stop there, and again, a lot of information, and back to you, Caleb.
Hey, thanks, Ronnie. We certainly appreciate your insights and just your experience here. If you don't learn something listening to Ronnie, then every time, then you're not listening.